There's something powerful about the moment you realize you're different, not better, not worse, just different. It's not always a moment of celebration. It often comes as a whisper, sometimes as pain. It's that early feeling that you're out of rhythm with the world around you, that you see things others don't, feel things others ignore, or think in ways that don't match the noise. And if you're not careful, the world will convince you that this difference is a flaw to be corrected, not a gift to be honored. You grow up learning to measure yourself against the crowd. School tells you to follow instructions. Society asks you to fit templates. Friends unknowingly teach you to minimize your intensity so you can belong. But what if you were never supposed to belong in the traditional sense? What if being different wasn't a burden you had to fix, but a sign you were called to lead from a higher place? People don't realize this, but almost every great transformation in history, philosophy, art, and human progress came from someone who first felt like an outsider. Those who challenged the status quo weren't trying to rebel. They were simply being true to the clarity they were born with. That feeling of misalignment you carry, that isn't weakness, that's signal. That's life tapping you on the shoulder saying, you weren't made to follow the crowd. You were born to carve your own way. But that realization rarely comes with applause. Most of the time, it comes with silence, with rejection, with misunderstanding. Being different can feel lonely at first. That's the test. Can you stay rooted in who you are when no one validates it yet? Can you walk your path when the crowd takes a different road? Because the truth is, if you're waiting for the world to give you permission to be you, you'll be waiting your whole life. Difference isn't something that sets you apart in a negative way. It's something that elevates your purpose, your ideas, your voice, your way of seeing reality. That's not noise to suppress. That's wisdom trying to emerge. That's potential unfolding in a world that desperately needs something real, something raw, something not manufactured for mass approval. When you feel different, it means you have a different lens, and that lens sees what others can't. Maybe you notice the cracks beneath the smiles. Maybe you hear the silence behind the noise. Maybe you sense the unspoken truths in rooms full of performance. That sensitivity, that depth, that's insight, that's your edge. And the edge always cuts against the grain. But here's where most people stumble. They try to round off their edges to make others comfortable. They dilute their truth to avoid judgment. And in doing so, they abandon their calling just to earn a place in the crowd. But why trade your gift for comfort? Why sacrifice your future to be tolerated in a room you're meant to outgrow? Being different is not easy, but neither is greatness, and the two always come together. So stop looking at your difference like it's something to be explained or apologized for. It's not. It's something to be claimed. The people who change the world are the ones who stopped waiting to be understood and instead focused on understanding themselves. They stopped blending in and started standing firm, not loud, not aggressive, just rooted. Let the world misunderstand you. Let them call you strange, intense, too quiet, too passionate. Let them whisper, because what they call too much today is what they'll admire tomorrow, once you've turned your inner fire into something undeniable. Being different isn't rejection, it's redirection. You're not being pushed out, you're being called up to something more aligned, more powerful, more meaningful than surface-level approval. When you finally accept that being different is your path, not your punishment, everything changes. The shame falls away, the self-doubt fades, and all that's left is purpose, unapologetic, undeniable, and unshakably yours, because being different is not a curse, it's your calling. There's a stage in every soul's journey where silence grows louder than any voice around you, where you feel unseen, unheard, and even misunderstood by the very people you once felt closest to. And in that quiet isolation, it's easy to believe something's gone wrong. But what if I told you nothing is wrong? What if I told you that space you're in, the loneliness, the separation, the stillness, is not a punishment, it's preparation? See, isolation often feels like a retreat from life. But it's actually life retreating from you temporarily, so it can give you space to evolve without interruption. Because real transformation doesn't happen under bright lights or in crowded rooms. It doesn't happen when everyone's watching or applauding. It happens in the unseen, in the hidden, in the depths of solitude. That's why the most powerful changes in you never arrive in noise. They rise in silence. They surface when you're stripped of distraction, of validation, of comfort, when you're no longer performing for the world and all that remains is who you truly are. That's the moment the mirror gets sharp. You begin to notice the habits that never served you. You begin to hear the internal dialogue that's been quietly directing your life. You begin to see your wounds without the blur of busyness. And that's when the real work begins. Isolation pulls you away from the false attachments. It removes the masks. It confronts you with your own reflection, not so you can hate it, but so you can meet it honestly. Because transformation requires truth. Not external truth, not the stories people tell about you, but internal truth, the one you've been avoiding because it hurts before it heals. This space, this period where you feel disconnected, is sacred. It's where roots go deep before anything ever rises. A tree grows in silence before it towers in strength. You are no different. Your evolution cannot be rushed. You don't bloom just because you want to. You bloom when you're ready, and readiness doesn't happen in crowds. It happens in the alone moments, where you realize that solitude is not the absence of love, it's the presence of alignment. It's during isolation that you become dangerous in the best way. Not to others but to limitation. You begin to shed the layers that kept you small. You stop asking for permission to be real. You stop shrinking to be accepted. And in that release, you begin to rise. People don't always talk about this part. They show you the glory, but they rarely show you the grind. They celebrate the outcome, but skip the inner war it took to get there. But I'm telling you now, that feeling you have, like you've been pulled back from the world, like the phone doesn't ring anymore, like conversations feel empty, like no one understands what you're going through, it's not the end. It's the threshold. That's the space between who you were and who you're becoming. The world has to fall silent sometimes for your voice to become clear. If it didn't, you'd keep living on noise and echo. But when the world quiets and you're left with your thoughts, your fears, your dreams, that's where the shaping begins. That's where you start asking better questions. Not how can I fit in, but what am I really here for? Not why did they leave, but what am I being guided toward? That's when everything starts to align. That's when your inner compass begins to speak. Some people fear isolation because they confuse it with abandonment. But isolation isn't about being forgotten. It's about being refined. Diamonds don't form in daylight. They form in pressure, in darkness, in depth. You too are being refined by your solitude. You're not breaking down, you're breaking open. And when it's time to re-emerge, you won't walk the same. You won't speak the same, you won't dream the same, because isolation didn't take anything from you. It gave you access to the version of yourself that's been buried under expectations and noise. So if you're in that place now where the path feels narrow and the air feels thin, breathe. You're not lost, you're in process. The cocoon is never comfortable, but the butterfly doesn't come without it. Isolation often precedes transformation because greatness doesn't bloom in public. It builds in silence. There's a quiet truth most people avoid. You don't belong everywhere, and that's not a flaw. It's a signal. It's a whisper from your deeper self that your place in this world is not random, not universal, and certainly not for every room you walk into. You weren't born to fit in like a puzzle piece in 1,000 different pictures. You were born to align with a specific calling, a specific energy, a specific purpose. And that means, by design, you won't resonate with every crowd, every environment, or every mindset you encounter. The discomfort you felt, the awkwardness in certain social circles, the resistance in some workplaces, the loneliness in places that were supposed to feel like home, that isn't because you're broken. It's because your spirit knows something those spaces can't reflect. It knows that shrinking yourself to be accepted is a betrayal. It knows that pretending to belong where your soul is quietly suffocating is a slow form of self-erasure. You're not meant to be everywhere. You're not supposed to blend in so seamlessly that you forget your own outline. Think about it. When have you grown the most? When you diluted yourself for approval? Or when you stood your ground, even when no one clapped? Real growth begins the moment you realize that not belonging is sometimes the biggest blessing in disguise. There's a deep-rooted pressure in society to be agreeable, to be palatable, to be likable to all, but what if that very pressure is what's holding your greatness hostage? What if being misunderstood by many is the cost of being truly understood by the few who matter? What if your truth was never meant to resonate with the crowd, but with a tribe you haven't even met yet? This is where the inner shift happens. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" And you start asking, "What rooms am I walking into that were never built to hold my kind of energy?" You start noticing that peace doesn't come from being liked by everyone. It comes from being fully yourself, even when it means walking alone. You weren't created to dim so others can feel bright. You weren't designed to explain your essence to people who refuse to listen. You're not meant to exhaust yourself translating your soul into a language that doesn't speak to your spirit. And when you stop doing all of that, you'll feel a weight lift, because trying to fit where you don't belong is one of the heaviest burdens to carry. The truth is, your uniqueness will offend some people. Your depth will intimidate others. Your clarity will frustrate those who live in confusion. Your focus will agitate those who live in distraction. But that's not your concern. You're not here to soften your edges just so the world feels more comfortable around you. You're here to honor the shape of your being, even when it doesn't align with the structures around you. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. It's knowing that there is sacred power in walking away from places that can't hold your growth. It's understanding that a lion doesn't need to explain why it doesn't belong in a sheep's pasture. It just doesn't. Not because one is better than the other, but because they serve different purposes, live by different instincts, and answer to different calls. And when you start living by that principle, you stop chasing acceptance. You start attracting alignment. The people, the spaces, the opportunities that are meant for you won't require you to tone yourself down. They won't ask you to explain your worth. They'll recognize it. They'll welcome it, not because you conformed, but because you stood firm. So if you feel like you don't belong right now, don't let that discourage you. Let it direct you. That feeling is not a dead end, it's a compass. It's guiding you toward the environments where your energy won't be tolerated. It'll be celebrated. Toward the work that doesn't drain your soul, but sets it on fire. Toward the people who don't just see you, they feel you. You don't belong everywhere because you were never meant to. You belong where your soul can breathe, where your growth is supported, not stifled, where your authenticity is embraced, not edited. And when you find that place, even if it's just within yourself for now, you'll understand not fitting in was never the problem, it was the invitation. Most people spend their lives trying to fit into templates they were never designed for. They chase trends, mimic voices, adopt identities that don't belong to them, all for the illusion of acceptance, the safety of similarity. But let me tell you something that very few will say out loud. The very thing you've been taught to hide, suppress, or question, that's probably your power. That's your uniqueness. And it's not just a trait, it's your edge. It's your fingerprint on the world, the mark no one else can leave. You see, the world doesn't need another copy of something that already exists. It doesn't need another watered-down version of what's popular right now. What it desperately needs, what it's quietly waiting for, is you as you are, unfiltered, unapologetic, fully expressed, because your uniqueness isn't a liability, it's leverage. It's what separates you from the sea of sameness. It's what allows you to bring something to the table that no one else can offer. But here's the challenge. Most people are afraid of being seen as different, afraid of standing out, because standing out means you might be judged, you might be misunderstood, you might not be invited to every table. And that's true, you might not. But what if the tables you're meant to sit at are the ones you'll never reach unless you embrace that difference? What if the price of your brilliance is the courage to walk alone until your tribe recognizes your light? Look at the people who have changed the world, the thinkers, the artists, the builders, the rebels. None of them did it by blending in. They broke the mold, often before anyone gave them permission. They leaned so deeply into who they were that the world had no choice but to adjust to their frequency. And it wasn't always easy. Many were ridiculed before they were respected, misunderstood before they were admired. But that's the nature of authenticity. It makes people uncomfortable before it inspires them. Your uniqueness will do that too. It will stir the air when you walk into a room. It will make people look twice, not because you're trying to stand out, but because you're simply being what they're not used to seeing: someone real. Someone bold enough to live truthfully, and that kind of presence is magnetic. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't chase validation. It just is, and in that being, it transforms everything around it. But let's be honest, owning your uniqueness takes work. It requires deep self-awareness. It demands that you stop comparing your journey to someone else's highlight reel. It asks you to build confidence not from applause, but from alignment, from knowing that even if no one claps, you're still walking in truth. That kind of confidence is rare, and that's why it's powerful. We live in a world that profits off your insecurity. It wants you to believe that you're not enough unless you look, think, speak, or live a certain way. But the moment you reject that narrative, the moment you say, "I don't need to be like anyone else, I just need to be more of myself," you become dangerous, because you're no longer controllable. You're no longer driven by the need to be accepted. You're moved by the need to be real. And when you start showing up like that, when you walk into your work, your relationships, your craft, your silence, with that kind of truth, something incredible happens. You stop performing, you stop chasing, and instead you start attracting the right people, the right paths, the right moments, not because you were trying to fit in, but because you dared to stand out. Your uniqueness is your greatest power because it is the only thing that can never be replicated. People can copy your style, your words, even your moves, but they can never replicate your essence. They can never steal your soul. And that's what you lead with. When you live from your uniqueness, you lead with your soul. And souls don't compete. They create, they connect, they rise. So stop hiding what makes you different. Stop waiting for the world to give you permission to be fully you. That permission was already granted the moment you were born. The moment you felt, "I don't see the world like everyone else." That's not your flaw, that's your invitation to carve your own path, to write your own story, to stand in your own light. Because when you own your uniqueness without apology, the world doesn't just notice, it changes. Every single day, you're bombarded by noise. Not just the noise of traffic, phones, or crowded places. I'm talking about the deeper noise, the mental clutter, the opinions of others, the doubts planted by comparison, the constant stream of expectations from the world around you, telling you who you should be, what success should look like, and how fast you should get there. And in the middle of all that, your signal, your truth begins to fade. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes harder to hear, and if you don't consciously learn to silence the noise, you'll spend your life listening to everything but yourself. There is a voice inside you, a still one. It's not loud, it doesn't shout, it doesn't rush, it's steady, it's calm, it speaks not from fear, but from knowing, and it knows you better than anyone else. It knows what fuels you, what drains you, what lights you up, and what dims your spark. That voice, that signal, is your deepest compass, and it's always guiding you, but you have to get quiet enough to hear it. The problem is, most people are uncomfortable with silence. They fill every empty space with something: music, scrolling, noise, chatter, anything to avoid being alone with their thoughts. But silence isn't the enemy, it's the gateway. It's where clarity lives. It's where the real answers begin to surface, not the ones fed to you by the world, the ones that come from within. And until you learn to get still, you'll keep mistaking the noise for guidance. You'll keep chasing validation instead of listening for direction. Silencing the noise doesn't mean cutting off the world completely. It means becoming selective. It means learning to filter. Not every voice deserves a seat in your mind. Not every opinion should have power over your choices. You've got to become a guardian of your mental space, just like a warrior guards the gates to a fortress. Your energy, your attention, your focus, they are sacred resources. Stop giving them away so cheaply. There's always going to be people who tell you what you can't do, what you're not ready for, what you should settle for. That's noise. There's always going to be doubt disguised as logic, fear disguised as caution, conformity disguised as success. More noise, but underneath all of that, there's the signal, the feeling that won't go away, the pull towards something deeper, something more meaningful. That's what you trust. When you're tapped into your signal, you move differently. You're not reactive, you're intentional. You're not chasing applause, you're following alignment. You start to walk your own path, even when it's not popular. And something powerful happens. Your life starts to make sense, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. It starts to feel right, even before it looks right. And don't expect the signal to always feel comfortable. It might guide you into solitude, into uncertainty, into change, but it won't guide you into chaos. The noise will. The noise will have you running in circles, trying to be everything to everyone and forgetting who you are in the process. But the signal anchors you. It doesn't push. It pulls gently, steadily toward the life that's meant for you, not the one others have scripted for you. To hear it, you've got to slow down. You've got to unplug sometimes. You've got to create space. That means solitude isn't just a retreat, it's a ritual. Silence isn't just an absence, it's a tool. And introspection isn't a luxury, it's a discipline. The more you practice it, the clearer things become. The more you tune out the distractions, the sharper your inner voice gets. And when that voice becomes your guide, you stop guessing so much. You stop needing permission. You stop looking outside for answers that have been inside you all along. There's nothing wrong with seeking counsel or learning from others, but the final decision must always align with the signal, because only you live with the consequences, only you carry the weight, and only you know what truly feels right in your bones. So trust yourself more, trust your intuition, trust your quiet knowing, and most of all, trust that the path you're being called to walk, no matter how unconventional, is yours for a reason. And when the world gets loud again, when everyone has an opinion, when doubt tries to creep in, just return to the silence. Let it speak, let it center you, because the truth doesn't shout. It doesn't beg to be heard. It simply waits for you to listen. Most people spend their entire lives trying to fit in, afraid that if they stand out, they'll be judged, misunderstood, or even rejected. So they dull their edges, soften their voice, and shrink their light just to be accepted by a world that never truly sees them. But you weren't born to blend in. You were born to lead, to disrupt, to challenge, to build something that only you can build, and none of that happens when you're busy trying to look like everyone else. The moment you try to conform, you disconnect from your essence, and the world doesn't need more it needs originals. It needs people who are bold enough to walk their own road, even when it's lonely, people who speak even when their voice shakes, who step forward when it would be easier to sit down, because leadership isn't about titles. It's not about control or being the loudest in the room. It's about presence, integrity, vision, the kind that comes from being rooted in who you are, not who you're expected to be. Standing out isn't about ego, it's about purpose. There's a reason your mind thinks differently. There's a reason you don't quite resonate with the crowd. That inner tension you feel when you try to blend in, that's your soul telling you it's not home there. You weren't built for the background. You were meant to create waves, not follow currents. And that means sometimes, a lot of the time, you'll walk alone. But don't confuse isolation with misdirection. Often, it's the first step of leadership. Real leaders rise in silence before they're recognized in public. They go through the fire, not for applause, but for refinement. They don't chase acceptance, they build impact. And they don't wait for permission to begin. If you keep waiting for the world to approve of your uniqueness before you fully embody it, you'll never lead, because the world rarely celebrates what it doesn't yet understand. That's why you have to be willing to be misunderstood, to keep moving even when no one claps, to keep showing up when no one gets it yet. And let me tell you something, people will resist you when you stop playing small. Not because you're wrong, but because your light threatens their comfort. That's not your problem. Your responsibility is not to make others comfortable, it's to become fully yourself. When you do that, when you step into your difference, into your truth, into your leadership, you give others permission to do the same. That's how the ripple begins. So don't chase crowds, build conviction. Don't water yourself down to be more digestible. Some people are not your audience, and that's okay. You're not here to appeal to everyone, you're here to resonate with the right ones. And they won't find you if you're hiding in the shadows of who you think you should be. You don't lead by fitting in, you lead by being real, unapologetically, unmistakably, relentlessly. Leadership is not about domination, it's about direction. You're not here to prove you're better, you're here to be truer. And that truth will naturally inspire others. It won't even require a speech, just your presence, your discipline, your authenticity. People can feel when someone has stopped pretending. That energy is rare. It's magnetic. It draws others not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. So stop waiting to be ready. Stop doubting your difference. Start walking like someone who knows who they are. Speak like someone who has something to say. Live like someone who knows their footsteps leave a mark, because they do. Whether you see it yet or not, your life is already shaping the atmosphere around you. You are already leading in some way. The only question is, are you doing it consciously? And when the time comes that your voice shakes the room, or your vision challenges the norm, and the world looks to you for direction, you'll be ready, not because you followed the script, but because you had the courage to write your own. Because you were never here to blend in. You were born to stand out and lead.